Christian Podcast. When the end comes, we're the last radio on earth. When the end comes. Hello, survivors. If you're listening to this, that means you're still alive. So you guys know me. My name is Beto Gudiño. I'm broadcasting from a tiny home in Southern California. Today we're going to have a super special guest, Kent Carlson. We are going to talk about the consumerism in the American church and what does that look like during the COVID-19 season. But I want to acknowledge that we've had visitors on our blog from many places around the world. From Rwanda, Nigeria, Ireland, countries as far as China. And we want to thank you for tuning in. We want to elevate your voices and would love to hear from you. If you want to visit our website, www.christianpodcast.com, to get to know me. And today's interview is a little bit long, so let's go right in. Here we go. All right, well, everybody, you guys are listening, and I would like to introduce you to a very special friend and guest today. His name is Kent Carlson. He's up in Northern California, as far as I know, and we like to hear from him. So, Kent, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. It's beautiful, sunny. Well, you know California, even the South and the North today is just gorgeous. So, sitting home in my pajamas.
Nice.
Go enjoying
So the half of you that I see is the presentable part? Okay.
Yes, absolutely.
Same here, man. Same here. We're all in this together. Kent, would you tell us a little bit about maybe your background and your position right now with your denomination and what that is, what your job is, just so people could know?
Sure. I planted I won't go back to my childhood or anything, but I planted Oak Hills Church in Folsom, California back in 1984. So I was there 32 years. Our church was one of those big, the church of what's happening now kind of churches, big seeker orientation, grew very quickly in our little pond. And we went through a major change there in the year 2000, where we restructured the church around formation and mission. And that was a tumultuous time, but we got through that. The church, I left in about 2016. I knew that I was not going to be the guy that was going to, or the individual person who would lead into the next season of our church's ministry. It was time for me to create some space. So I was going to create my own gig, working with pastors and churches who are seeking to rethink Christianity, rethink the church at the end of Christendom, and who are recognizing our increasing inability to reach non-church people, all those kinds of things, the mass exodus of millennials and Gen Z from the church. And so I was starting that process of, if you want to call it consulting, but working, training, mentoring. And then our denomination that I've been a part of with the church in Folsom is the North American Baptist Conference. And through a series of events, they asked me if I'd like to come on staff and create a new position. And the position is Vice President of Leadership Formation. And so what I do essentially is work with pastors, churches, Christian leaders, and help to re-envision the church at the end of Christendom. to get a fuller understanding of what the gospel is, what the good news is, what the kingdom of God is, what is our actual message, what's a church to look like, and trying to break out of old paradigms and figure out how to be this unique alternative community in the world. And so that's what I do. I've been trying to carve out programs and work with existing programs to and training things to get at that stuff.
Awesome. I love it. And I think it was, during this season of consulting and helping the church rethink and reimagine what it means to be missional. When I met you, right, through the Ethos, what is it, an Ethos program or? Ethos. So I met you about 2 years ago, and it was under this conversation of what is the church going to look like, what things need to change, what's happening in the Big C church, and how we can help it like reorganize and have a different vision for the future. And I love it because, besides meeting you, you have this book, I have it in my hands. It's called The Renovation of the Church, where you kind of narrate a little bit of your experience at Oak Hills Church, going from a seeker-friendly church to focusing on spiritual formation. And I would love, you have here a little narration where you describe the Disneyland or the Disney formula. And it's super interesting when you say, you're sitting with your creative arts pastor. Would you tell us a little bit, help people have a picture or narrate that little part where you are with your creative arts pastor and describe what the Disneyland formula is?
You're assuming I remember that portion of the book, but I do actually remember that section. The seeker service that we had in those days was all oriented around attracting what is called "quote unquote" a seeker, and we would bring them into church, have them invite them in through various means, and they didn't have to say anything, sing anything, sign anything, give anything, and we essentially put a production together that they could watch. We had a very, at that season of our life, a reductionistic, truncated understanding of the gospel, and which essentially receive Jesus as your Savior and your sins will be forgiven to go to heaven when you die, and then perhaps we can then teach you how to actually be a follower of Christ after that. Problem is that when you put church together like that, you are actually forming people by how we attract them and keep them, and what we do during our worship services, teach people about the nature of God, who God is. So when you have a spectator-oriented worship service, you are teaching people that the Christian life is spectating, and one in which you then evaluate how the service went, and you join in the consumeristic capitalism of churches competing for the loyalty and attendance of the church-going public. But we were into it deeply. I was a theater major for a while in college, so the whole performance thing, every week was kind of like a theatrical performance with dance and drama and hot music and sermon and various things. And the Disney formula thing that you were referring to, that's the whole, and it was actually spoken about in those circles. It was the make them laugh, make them cry kind of experience. And we had a whole team of people that worked all week full time and putting the service together. The one who was in charge of that, our creative arts pastor, we had just finished a service that had all the elements into it. It's really cool. Dance, drama was really good. The music was great. And after the service, people were lining up wanting to talk to me about Jesus. And so God was working there. But after 4 services, we sat down. I remember sitting down in the chair in the front row with him, and he collapsed next to me because he had been elbow deep in all the things that it took to make that service come together, all the rehearsals, the writing, the all that. And we had gotten quite good at it. And he sat down next to me, and he was being very facetious, but he let his guard down, and he goes, "We don't even need God to do this." And there's the interesting thing is there's probably some truth to that. Once you know what levers to pull, what knobs to spin, you can create an experience that whether there's a God or not, people can be impacted by it. We joked and laughed because we know without Christ we can do nothing, and we knew we didn't mean that. But the phrase stuck with me, the thought stuck with me, because I realized there was a severe element of truth in it.
Wow. Yes, that's what I was reading, and it impacted me because in the season that we're in, with COVID-19, unexpected, a lot of churches, of course, started doing online anything, right? I mean, online preaching, online gatherings. And it's so interesting to me because, like you said, you were a major in theater. Well, I'm a major in communications and video production. So I happen to thrive in this COVID-19 season. It's like, wow, I'm actually putting together the services. They're looking amazing because I'm a camera guy, right? I like the angles. I go out, I picture the palm trees, the sun. And in a sense, it's almost like I'm doing what I love, but I noticed that we are kind of doing the same. We're putting a production of good content and good quality out there, but now people don't need to come and sit down and watch it in front of them, right? Now they sit wherever they're at and they watch it on their phones or their computers. But it's almost like a very similar experience. And what is the next step? Because we don't want to get stuck in same formula, just attract people, and now we have an audience who is watching. How do we move on from that to spiritual formation, to connecting with them on a deeper level?
Well, I think, and you're right. I mean, I've obviously churches had to figure out what to do, and some kind of online presence is important, and so many have done so much work, and I've seen such extraordinary, quote unquote productions, and many people seem to enjoy them. But the danger is that we take the very worst of evangelical worship, which is its spectatorship, and put it on steroids by sticking it in a production online where people can, watch it while they're drinking their oatmeal shake in the morning. And so I think, so we have to figure out what that means, how to do that. I think what's important for all Christian leaders, pastors, to remember is that spiritual formation is not an option. Everyone is being spiritually formed. The question is whether it would be purposeful and intentional. One can't live your life without being spiritually formed, for the good or for the bad. Mm-hmm. What is our character being formed in? Who is the person I am actually becoming? Am I a person who forgives easily, or am I a person who is very defensive? Do my insecurities, does my shame tend to rise up within me so that I have a number 8 reaction to a number 2 infraction, and I think it's justified, but that 6 differential, that's my junk. And so how do I pay attention to that? Well, how we put together our churches, our worship services, our programming, all these things are formative. They form people. The structures of our services, the structures of our church organization are formative, and they are much stronger than the words that we actually say. And so when we create spectators, when we give in to consumer demand so that they'll keep going to our church and not another church, that's the tricky thing. 60%, and if you start talking to millennials or Gen Z, it can go to 70 and 80% of the non-church population will never go to our churches again. They just won't. It's a
look who's here.
My man, Mr. Decker.
What's
How
up?
you
I
doing?
can always see your mouth.
You guys live together or what?
No, he came to. I told you we're in the process of doing church online, so he came up to pick up the cards for the camera.
My shout outs.
Oh, nice. Very
See
good.
you, man.
We're doing this online, so he's working from his house with the camera, but he happened to leave the memory cards here, so he had to drive here and get them. So we're not social distancing, as you could see.
No, apparently not. That's okay. You're probably safe. He's the one that's in trouble.
Yeah. So, man, that's so cool what you're telling me. I was reading in one of the latest chapters in the book where you kind of talk about the vision for the future and where things are going. And I mean, this book is, you wrote it quite a few years ago. So it'd be interesting to see if that vision, came to happen or not, or where you're at in those steps. But you were saying this phrase that I really loved: distancing ourselves from personal ambition. Could you just elaborate a little bit on that idea?
Sure. I think, and this is part of the problem that's come up with the online experiences during the COVID-19 quarantine. I've seen a resurgence of competition, all cloaked in nice words because we're nice people. We say the right things, all Christianly and everything. But people are talking more than ever about how many views, how many people. Their weekend service is doubling, and they're always gonna have this because of the impact. And I mean, and what they're not saying honestly is people stroll in for 15 seconds, a couple minutes, and they're eating their eggs and they're doing all sorts of things, taking their phone into the bathroom, and they they're not really attending the church. They're just having this opportunity to check out a whole mess of different churches. And that's not everybody, of course. I've seen some, and our church has been involved in just really brilliant, beautiful online experiences where there's a lot of interaction in real time, and that's pretty cool. But there is the fatal flaw in how the entrepreneurial kind of concept of the church in the United States is that you take the ambition of the pastor leadership, and then you join it together with the consumeristic training of all of us as Americans, and you have this symbiotic relationship where the pastor will give people what they desire, of happening church service, cool music, good speaking, all the kind of bells and whistles that go along with that, a great experience, and people will reward that by their attendance, by their giving, unless the church stops doing as good a job, and they'll try another one that does an even better job. And that you can't build disciples of Jesus Christ in that environment. It just won't happen. I know one church that put out a postcard in our area that says, "We have over 50 ministries to meet your particular lifestyle needs." And I'm going, I could just see Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount, saying something like that. And so what we can't really do much about the consumerism in the culture. It's just it's like talking to fish about water. It's just all pervasive. We've been trained to be demanding consumers just by living in this environment. But we can do something about the ambition. The scripture is clear about issues of selfish ambition throughout history. People who wrote on these things spoke often about selfish ambition. But it is one of those pastoral or leadership sins that's just really not talked about, honestly, about how much it actually drives us. I find pastors much more able and willing to talk about sexual lust with authenticity than they are about the actual ambition, the kind of low-grade temperature of thinking someone else's ministry is doing better than theirs, the kind of insecurity when an inability to celebrate the successes of others, the kind of gnawing shame that I'm not doing a good enough job, because people are now, particularly people are checking out other services online, and they say, well, this guy's a lot better preacher than you are, Pastor. And that kind of stuff is there, and we need to very intentionally get down into the details of that conversation with people we can be actually honest about, and realize there's very little spiritual growth that happens when we are giving ourselves over to that kind of ambition. Wow.
Incredible. You also talk about a little bit of the relationship, or maybe inspiration, or there's somewhat of a connection you guys had with Willow Creek. Uh-huh. And then you make the point, like you want to make the point that, hey, we're not against Willow Creek. There's actually good stuff that we learned. But I'm wondering, 20 years later, you started in 2000, 20 years later, what does that look like? What does that inspiration coming from Willow Creek look like? Do you still value maybe the things that mega churches did or are doing to inspire people? Or are you like completely broken away from like the mega church tendency? Or I'm just curious to know what's the relationship nowadays in your mind, at least, with kind of like the mega church experience.
Well, God's in the mega church, and some of the finest leaders on planet Earth are pastors of mega churches. So I would be very hesitant to want to get into the hidden and sometimes not so hidden motives of any kind of pastor. I don't see ambition more fully raising its head in the pastors of mega churches, like more so than pastors of small churches. Small church pastors sometimes just wish they were better, and they feel this constant, like I said, low grade temperature of inadequacy. But that comes from ambition as well, not a sense of acknowledgement of who I actually am, my identity, my life is hid with Christ in God. And so I don't live with this not enoughness. I live with this completeness, with the sense that in Christ I am complete. For the large church pastors, I think they simply have to wrestle with the idea that the way a large church is structured, the kind of things it takes to keep that machine running, inherently has a very strong consumeristic bent to it. And once you create a structure that needs that many people coming, it's very hard sometimes to be the prophetic voice that you need to be, because some people will leave, and they won't like that. And so theoretically, I think the larger the church, the better, if we stay true to what it means to be a follower of Jesus Christ. What I know we can't do is cater to consumer needs, just be purveyors of religious goods and do a better job than the church down the street. Christianity, the Christian life of discipleship, at its core, has to be, how do I do really well when I don't get what I want? But there is, and if I can be a little aggressive or assertive or maybe even harsh here, there is in American Christianity, particularly our white evangelical expression of it, a kind of a syncretism, very similar to the syncretism you have with the Catholic Church and indigenous religions throughout South America and Central America. The syncretism in the United States is a syncretism with Enlightenment individualism, with sometimes white nationalism, with American exceptionalism. And so our understanding of Christianity is blend very tightly with success, keeping our way of life, the ability to wrap the flag around our Christian teachings is scary in my mind. Christianity at its core is a invitation to a different way of living. And there are aspects of all nations, cultures that are not oriented around that. We have to be oriented around the poor, the marginalized, those who are most vulnerable. And the scripture's just really clear about that.
True that, man. I would almost summarize what you're saying with your own quote from your book. That, and maybe I'll refresh you because I'm sure, maybe you didn't have it at the top of your mind, but you said, I find myself continually torn between my dual roles as an institutional guy and a radical prophet. Right?
Yeah,
and
that's true. Particularly even now in my denominational responsibilities, we talk about a machine that needs to be kept going, and it has such beautiful history, so many godly, wonderful people down through the years. But that kind of button down, wear your Dockers, have a nice little car to drive in, where really I want to meet late at night in a French cafe with cigarettes and berets and plot the overthrow. And there is a little bit of that. A large part of it has to do with how much trouble do we think the church is in? Because nobody looks for a doctor if they don't think the patient is sick, or if they think that just some ibuprofen and some orange juice will be fine. But when the patient is sick, and perhaps if the sickness is terminal, then people start getting desperate. I think one of the benefits we have now culturally is that people are realizing that Christianity is no longer at the cultural and political and social center of society. And some people are afraid of that. And so they're trying to grab for power and try to legislatively, or by who we elect, to make sure that we stay in power and no one takes our way of life away. Other people, though, are open to the fact, well, maybe Christianity doesn't need to be in the center of power. In fact, when it is in the center of power, it tends to not do so well. Christianity was born on the margins of society and did a thrilling job of representing the reality of Christ in their day. Also, the other external thing, as I mentioned earlier, is that, and everybody knows this, millennials and Gen Z are leaving the church in droves, and they're not coming back. They don't want to take over daddy's business. And
wow.
And so we have to figure out ways to empower, elevate the voices of millennials, Generation Z, and let them lead us into the future, because we don't know how to do it. And it's a little pathetic when guys like me start putting on skinny jeans and and doing whatever we need to do to try to attract a crowd. It's not only pathetic, it's fairly unattractive.
I would like to see that, man. I'd pay to see that.
No.
That's funny. I was listening to another I listen to so many podcasts nowadays, and maybe that's a tool to to reach out to millennials and zillennials. But I was listening to this podcast called Doctrine and Devotion, and I think it's like a couple guys, but I think they belong, I could be wrong, but I think they belong to like the Southern Baptist Convention. And in one of the episodes, they're actually talking about what is wrong and what is good with their denomination. What would you change? So one of the guys asked the other guy, okay, what needs to change? And he's like, well, first, the name and the logo. and I was actually listening. I'm like, he's totally right. Because in my mind, I could be whatever. But when I hear Southern Baptist Convention, just something about the name, when I came to America, I was like, Southern Baptist, it sounds like a huge name, so almost like political. And I like it, right? And North American Baptist, it's North American Baptist, right? It's almost like political too. But
it's North American, but Mexico isn't invited into it. So
yeah, exactly. We don't have enough Christians that can categorize as that. But I was actually man, a good logo and a different name, maybe that's a way to rebrand a whole denomination. And that's kind of like a silly thought, but this is where I wanted to go with the denomination thought, because I was reading this other book, and I was mentioning it to you before coming on the call, by Leonard Sweet. It's called Rings of Fire. In the middle of the book, he sings the song by Johnny Cash. But he's talking about the rise of the nation state and denominations at about the same period in the 1700s, or actually in 1700s or so. So he says this, it says, it's no accident that the mediating structures known as nation states and denominations are coming apart at the seams and at the center. And it was probably no accident that they both appear in the same decade, in the 17th century. So then he lays out this question, and I think, maybe it'd be interesting to hear from you what your answer would be to this question in terms of coming from a denomination, right? In what ways, as an unbounded commitment to the preservation of these entities, ignore or deny its undoing?
Yeah, well, there's no question. The nation states, if you go back, often also had a religious, flavor to it. In other words, if you, when you get baptized, you become a citizen of the nation, as it were. It's like the state and the church were one, with various expressions of Christianity, whether it's Lutheranism or Reformed or Catholicism or Presbyterianism. They're wed with the state. And that works well. I don't think it ever worked well because it consolidated power, and people used force, sometimes even military force, to evangelize, which is, this is the whole story, as you know, of colonialism in South America and Central America. And this is the inherent problem with nation states, with church states or state churches. You have a tendency to try to advance the cause simply by the political and sometimes military power that you have. And so it's not real. The expression of the Christian faith, this doesn't mean God's not in it and working, but the organic, beautiful experience of Christianity can never thrive in a controlling power over environment. Denominations, oftentimes they began with particular theological emphases, or in opposition to other people's theological emphases. It began sometimes with ethnic background. You have the Baptist General Conference, which used to be the Swedish Baptists, so they named themselves the Baptist General Conference. And now, again, in your little suggestion of change the logo and the name, they changed their name now to Converge.
Nice.
Which is, all these churches and groups are using verbs to describe themselves now. So maybe it's a good thing, but obviously nothing substantive comes when changing a logo or the name. It's a stylistic thing. The real change has to become with our understanding of our self-identity, why we exist. My own denomination used to be the German Baptists, and there's hardly any Germans left anymore. Although there are some, but they changed to the North American Baptists, which I agree, it's an incredibly boring and rather inaccurate title for who we are. But I'll just say this: I think in most denominations, there's a real crisis of not even knowing why we exist. Sometimes we exist because in the beginning stages, take our denomination, the reason for existence because they wanted to reach German immigrants with the gospel. And they did actually an extraordinary job. And then for a period of time, they were a missionary sending organization that has missionaries and mission work all over the world. But for quite some time, decades and decades, it's been trying to figure out why we exist. Why do we gather people together? We did so sometimes just because relationships. So-and-so went to school with so-and-so, and they got married and they had kids and they went to the same school. So you have this kind of family thing. Obviously, nobody in my church knows that story or feels any loyalty or familial kind of connection to it. So why do we join together So I think denominations as a whole are trying to answer the question, who are we? Why do we exist? Where are we going? And who can we, do we actually need to exist? And how do we join together? Who do we need to help take us there? In our particular denomination, there has been a rallying around the phrase missional formational movement. In other words, recognizing from a theological perspective that the church always has this missional out there motivation. We don't exist to have services on Sunday morning. The Sunday morning service is not the destination, the be all and end all. It is a way to get together, to tell the story again, to remember who we are, but then we're sent out. The formational aspect is we are not just sent out with people saying things. We are sent out as people who are being transformed into the image of Christ. And our life as individual persons, but even more importantly, as a community of faith, is beautiful. This is why it's so tragic now when you see situations where Christians just are looking mean, afraid, scared, conspiracy theories abounding, and we simply aren't leading with an expression of love. And we add to the antagonism in our society by not being able to demonstrate that the presence of Christ is among us. And because that is true, I cannot speak unkindly of another person. I cannot call person names and seek to overpower them by my will. This is contrary to the way of Christ. And there will be no hearing given to us by the increasing percentage of non-church people unless the Christian faith results in a beautiful alternative way of living. And that is our job, whether we're a denomination or not. Awesome.
And I mean, from what I'm reading and gathering, some of the, maybe I'm just going to use the word revival so people can understand, but some of the revival that's coming may not come from America, right? Maybe it's going to happen and come from China, just like this virus came from China, right? And it's interesting to see that nation states and denominations might be in transition, and maybe the superpower that America had, maybe it's also in transition, right? And globally, I think, I mean, with globalism and immigration and all the changes in the world in like the last 30 years, everything is radically different. And now economies like in the East are superpower economies, right? So who knows what in 20 years, who's going to be in control or in command? Some people are suggesting, even like Leonard that I'm reading, suggests that it's going to be corporations that are going to be in, kind of like the governmental control is going to come from corporations. And even some, sci-fi movies that I watch portray that sort of vision, right? Like Ready Player One and some shows I watch on Netflix. It's like, okay, now the corporations, and you kind of see that a little bit with like Amazon and Facebook. And I don't know if you noticed, like Facebook about 2 years ago or so, like Mark Zuckerberg was actually in Congress, and they had like this almost like a standoff, like, you got to give us more control into your platform. And he's saying, hey, I'm the creator of my platform. I do whatever I want with it. And they're like, but we're the government and we need to have access for the benefit of like, the population and stuff. So just in a fun way or whatever kind of way, what are some of your predictions for what's going to happen, let's say in, 2030, 2040 with the church, with, where things are going?
Well, just one thought came to my mind when you were talking about the power of multinational corporations and that happens there, and the power of governments. The story behind that I think always needs to be told is that regardless of what power centers are in control, it is the marginalized of the world who are the ones who get the short stick all the time. Power always goes after the most vulnerable, even things like climate change. People of wealth and people of power will be able to protect themselves. The most vulnerable will not. And they're the voices that are left out of these discussions. And this is what's so terrible in my mind about kind of a nationalism, particularly a Christian nationalism, that I use our country because that's the country I live in. When you get people thinking that God wakes up in the morning and checking who's sneaking into his favorite country, and that's a concern of his, and that he looks at the world in the same way that we look at it. And I think Christianity always has this. It's never about power. It's about power, but never power over. It's the power of the reality of the Spirit of God among us. And it's a power derived from love and being for the other. Looking ahead to the future for the church. Did you want to say something there? I saw you.
I was coughing my COVID out, man.
You had a cough button there. Way to go. With regards to the church, I think, and again, there'll always be some large churches, at least in the foreseeable future. But I think we'll see many more the celebration of a smaller church. In fact, some people are referring to networks of smaller churches. There's a guy named Brian Sanders who wrote an extraordinary book called Underground Church, and he comes out of a network of churches out of Tampa, Florida, where there's hundreds of churches that have 12 people in it, 18 people, 20 in it, who all have elders there and who all are gathered around a mission, and they refer to as micro churches. And nobody on staff in these churches are paid, or none of the leaders there are paid. I think we're going to have many, many more bivocational pastors, or even pastors who simply do not get paid at all in the church. We have watched carefully and been trained by a church out of Chicago area by a guy named David Fitch from Northern Seminary. And they have I think 5 pastors on their staff. And but none of them are paid, and none of them are allowed to work more than 15 hours a week at the church. So if a church planter, because that professional clergy thing, it just absolutely by nature creates a dependency, creates the pastors do the work deal. And so if a church planter, a guy or a woman wants to plant a church comes to me, and I say, well, go apprentice as a plumber for a year. Learn how to become a plumber, because you can pull $70,000 a year if you have, any kind of energy to you once you've been trained that way, and then go plant a church. And if for some reason the church requires you to put more time and energy into it and draw some salary, that's fine. But what you have is a church planter coming into an area, and they want a full-time gig as a pastor. And so to do that, by the end of the second year, you have to have 200 people coming. And so right away, you're asking all the wrong questions. How do I get people to come to this church? And you're asking questions of attraction oriented around the Sunday morning service. I think one of the benefits, potential benefits, and I hope we learned some of this, is in the COVID-19 time, in American churches, North American churches, the central aspect of the church, the thing that everything gathers around, is the Sunday morning service and the building. Trying to imagine what would the church look like if we didn't have those things. Well, we get to imagine it now. Yeah. But what are we actually imagining? And so you can, Alan Hirsch has this wonderful illustration here where you think of the Sunday morning service and building or the church as a chess game. And the Sunday morning service and the building is the queen. And the queen can do all this stuff. You move in any direction. It's the most powerful piece on the board. But now we're playing without the queen. Mm-hmm. And if you want to be a very good chess player, you have to learn how to maximize all the other pieces on the board. If all you do is depend yourself on the queen, well, then the queen ever gets taken, you don't even know how to do chess anymore. And so what we're doing now is playing without the queen, and we should be figuring out what are the aspects of the church that we have atrophied in that makes a church strong. But instead, I fear that many Christian leaders are simply figuring, okay, our queen's been hurt, but how do we put a Band-Aid on it and try to
save the queen? God save our precious queen.
Yes. That's right. This is for our UK brothers and sisters. That's right.
Man, it's been so phenomenal to hear from you, to hear your thoughts on where the church has been, maybe for yourself in your own journey, in the past 30-something years, where maybe it's heading, maybe where we hope it heads, with the kingdom of God in mind, rather than consumerism or attractional models in mind, right? But missional models in mind. And I think probably this COVID season it's part of God like almost hitting the reset button and saying, okay, focus on what's important. And for some churches it might happen, right? From some other churches, like you said, we got to save the queen now, and all the energy is into that. But I think we're going to see maybe some new movements starting because of COVID-19, and it might be a beautiful thing. Maybe a resurgence of some kind of like missional oriented church here in America, right? So thank you so much. Would you point people maybe because your book is fabulous. Is there a way where people could find it still? Like, is it on Amazon or a bookstore?
Yeah, you can find it on Amazon if you're interested in it. It's written, seriously, I haven't read it since I wrote it, so I forget a lot of the stuff that's...
I read it, man, and it's good.
I'm glad that it has some good stuff in it. You can get it there. If that's something, it's mostly our story and some of the learnings out of it that I think were helpful. I think why it was interesting when it came out and why it got the attention it did is because we were a large church that was on the rise, and while we were on the rise, we tried to change it. And, about 1,500 people left the church at that point, and partly because we were idiots and we did a terrible job of the process. But part of it is we just changed the unspoken contract that we had with the people coming, and they didn't want that. And there was almost a little bit of a violence in the things that we did, the change. Some asked, why didn't we just quit? Well, again, I was a founding pastor. The experience that we had that felt that we needed to change the church happened throughout the leadership at this experience with God. And so we felt if we left to quit, the church would, kind of unravel at that point. And I also was overly optimistic that everyone would love what we were doing. And so, but it was learned a lot from it. It took about 8 to 10 years. And the DNA of the church changed after that, but not without it's my more than my fair share of mistakes that I made in the process.
Cool, awesome, man. Well, I highly recommend it. For people that are listening, it's called The Renovation of the Church. What happens when a seeker church discovers spiritual formation? And on the cover, you have pomegranates, and you were explaining to me how is this related to the topic?
It looks. The book has the red and black has a little Vampire Diaries kind of look to it, and then the pomegranates gets the whole Song of Solomon. So it's like Song of Solomon meets Vampire Diaries. It's the kind of, they did pomegranates because pomegranates were in, I guess. And I had, we didn't have any say in that. So
okay, we're going to say that the church needed to become healthy, and pomegranates are a healthy way to.
Yes. Okay, that's good. That's
all right.
That works.
We'll make it work. Man, really appreciate you. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. It's been a treat. It's been fun getting to know you, and blessings on this podcast. It sounds great.
Thank you, brother. Well, my friends, there you have it. What an amazing conversation with Mr. Kent. I would love to hear from you. If you can relate to this point of view about the Disney formula or the consumeristic church and would like to give us your opinion, please visit our website, www.christianpodcast.com, and leave me a message. Make sure while you're there you can check out my 2 recent blogs, Why I Owe $10,000, that's true, and my crazy dream that made me think of the Avengers and how is Jesus related to Doctor Strange. That's a fun one you guys gotta check out. And well, before I leave, I want to remind you that hope is always the future. And why not? To remind you also, if you would like to support this podcast, there are a few links with options on how you can contribute to this amazing last radio on Earth on the website as well. Thanks for tuning in to this broadcast. Adiós, amigos. Hasta la próxima. Thanks for listening to this episode of Christian Podcast. If you liked this episode, share it with friends and family. Make sure you subscribe and leave a positive review wherever you can. You can also visit christianpodcast.com to learn more about our show. Hasta la vista.